Well, thank you, Mr President, and I thank the government leader for allowing me to continue to send members of the House. I take this motion up where the former leader of the government and good friend of the Honourable Max Willis left off when he moved the motion on the eve of the Delta COVID epidemic and the disruption to our parliament and our lives that occurred. That interruption and the Honourable Don Harwin's subsequent retirement gives me the unexpected honour and privilege to lead on the government's motion honouring the contribution of the former president of this place. I'll remind members of the motion moved and adjourned by the Honourable Don Harwin. I move that 1, this House expresses and places on the record its deep sense of the loss sustained to the state and to the House by the death of the Honourable Max Frederick Willis, RFD, a member of this House from 1970 to 1999 and President of this House from 1991 to 1998. And 2, that this resolution be communicated by the President to his family. I first want to acknowledge the family of Max Willis, who are here in attendance today. His daughters, Catherine Engel, Joanna Longland and his son, David Willis, along with his niece, Elizabeth Willis, who is the daughter of another great Liberal, Sir Eric Willis, a former Liberal Premier of this state. A warm welcome to you all. As any member of this place will tell you, it is impossible to do our job without the love and the support of family and friends, and indeed the sacrifice of family and friends. And thank you all for what you did to support Max Willis in his long service here. I note in the simple yet eloquent notice placed in the Sydney Morning Herald upon the death of Max Willis the words, relict of his beloved wife Wendy, beloved father of Catherine, Sarah, David and Joanne, and father-in-law of Paul, Gareth and Oliver, devoted grandfather of Bryce, Imogen, Leighton, Archer and Finn, an impressive Willis clan. I also acknowledge the former members in attendance today, the Honourable John Hannaford and the Honourable Jim Longley, and thank them for attending. I note without listing them, the numerous apologies from former colleagues and staff members I have received. Max Willis, who passed away on August 2021, was a member of the Legislative Council for 28 years, from 1970 to 1999, and as I said, President for almost 7 years. Max was born in 1935 in Murwillumbah, a small town on the Tweed River near the New South Wales-Queensland border. The son of a butter factory worker, he was not someone born to affluence or any particular privilege. Growing up in the first half of the 20th century, Max was one of those people that the Liberal Party was established to represent, one of Menzies' forgotten people. Max clearly came from a family of community and public service-minded people, with his older brother, Sir Eric, who Max described as his hero, serving in the other place as the member for Earlwood from 1950 to 1978 and Premier of New South Wales for a short period in 1976. I occasionally met Sir Eric when he visited Max here in his time as President, and I saw the genuine affection between the two brothers who had shared a career journey together. Max was a school captain of Murwillumbah High School. He is one of several persons to serve the Legislative Council from Murwillumbah or the Tweed District. Harry Budd, a former president, John O. Johnson, a former president, Anne Simons, a former member, and John Evans, a former clerk of the House and who is here today and acknowledge, and who I owe a debt to for much of the research for today's motion, and I welcome him to the President's Gallery and apologise for the plagiarising. Max served nearly 29 years in this chamber, but his sense of duty and public service began much earlier in his life. In 1953, at the tender age of 18, Max joined what was then called the Citizens Military Force, which we now know as the Australian Army Reserve. Max would spend over 30 years as a reservist, attaining the rank of Brigadier. Max Willis was a founding member of the legendary Earlwood Young Liberals, which was the first branch established in Australia and includes amongst its alumni former Prime Minister John Howard, former Foreign Minister Maurice Payne, our friend the Honourable John Ryan and the Honourable Don Harwin himself. After completing high school at Murwillumbah, Max set off for Sydney to study a Bachelor of Laws at the University of Sydney. After completing his studies in 1957, he was admitted as a solicitor and worked at Serrester, Willis and Bowring, a local Miranda firm that still successfully operates today. Max worked as a successful solicitor for 12 years before being elected to the Legislative Council in 1970 to complete the term of a Labor member, Christopher Love. Members of the Legislative Council were elected differently in those days, with the Legislative Assembly and Legislative Council meeting together and electing the members. When he was elected, Max was just 34 years old, the second youngest member of the Legislative Council. He noted in his valedictory address that at one point he and the other young member, the Honourable Clyde Parker, both in their 30s, calculated when the two of them entered the House, they reduced the average age of the House from something like 75 to 73 years old. Max was a member before reconstitution of the House to a fully elected House in 1978. He reflected upon the House he entered, noting it was less political and more noblesse oblige. He said one was not expected to rock the boat. It was not the kind of thing one did in the Legislative Council, much more the behaviour of that other place. He observed the sitting hours here were not onerous. He said, quote, "We came here at 4 p.m. 2 days a week and we left at about 9 p.m. and we had dinner then and went home." I think the harder German sessional orders are heading in that direction. I heard that. And of course, he was expected to wait at least 3 years before making his maiden speech. He was one of the 10 members of the Legislative Council at the historic free conference of the both houses in 1988 to resolve the deadlock that occurred between the houses over the reform of the Legislative Council. The free conference negotiated a compromise with the Rand government and the Assembly members on the outcome of the method of election and reform of the Legislative Council. At the free conference, Rand conceded on the method of voting and the quota system. Max regarded that as a significant win for the Council, as it largely made it difficult for a government of the day to gain a majority in the Legislative Council. During his time in this place, Max served as a shadow minister across a number of portfolios: education, tourism, environment and planning. In 1977, Max was appointed Deputy Leader of the Opposition in the Legislative Council, and a year and a half later, he became the Leader of the Opposition in the Legislative Council. In the 1980s were a difficult time to be elected a Liberal in New South Wales. The Labor Party held government here for almost 12 years with sizeable majorities for much of that time. This made an effective opposition and an important balance against the excesses of government of the day, particularly here in the House of Review. When the Greiner government came to office following the election in March 1988, the Legislative Council established 2 standing committees on the 9th of June 1988, and Max was the first chair of the inaugural Social Issues Committee, and as the chair of that committee, he made a significant contribution to the committee's first inquiry into access to adoption information. Max often cited that the unanimous groundbreaking report as his #1 achievement in public office. And I note the Honourable Fred Nile, a long-term member of that committee, the Social Issues Committee, served on that very first Social Issues Committee and that far-reaching report, and thank you for that too. The subsequent laws that came from the report opened up adoption information and affected nearly 1 million people directly and indirectly, and continue to play a role today in family reunions and, importantly, informed family histories. Max noted in his valedictory speech that he was pleased to see that despite the significant changes that were made on the structure of this place during his term, it remained a House of Review. Looking at the number of inquiries we currently have underway, it seems that approach continues today. In 1991, Max was elected President of the Legislative Council, replacing Labor member John O. Johnson, becoming the 2nd consecutive President born in Murwillumbah. So that's a bit of a hint there. Max served as President for 7 years under 3 different premiers. And during the 1990s, when the Council tested its powers to order the production of documents to the House, Max was President when Michael Egan was found guilty of contempt of the House on the 2nd of May 1996. For failing to table papers relating to the Lake Cowal gold mines. President Willis famously ordered the Usher of the Black Rod, Warren Cahill, to remove Egan from the chamber and out onto the footpath in Macquarie Street, a deliberate provocation which subsequently resulted in legal action by Egan. Ultimately, the decision of the High Court in Egan versus Willis and Cahill in 1988 was a defining moment in the recognition of the powers of the Legislative Council to order the production of papers from the Executive Government. It was the political tactics and the cleverness of the then Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable John Hannaford, together with the procedural knowledge and drafting of the then Clerk of the House, John Evans, both here today, and the brilliance of the Senior Counsel, Brett Walker, in advocating arguments of the Council before the courts that really counted. In his 2016 oral history, Max reflected upon the powers of this House, and particularly those acquired then, noting, without direct attribution to any contemporary activities of this House, quote, "If you've got a power, you diminish that power if you overuse it. You sustain that power if you use it prudently." Very wise words indeed. As the President of the Legislative Council, Max was a great defender of the institution of Parliament against the intrusion of the Executive Government. In March 1992, the government published a report by Minister Tim Moore and Roger Wilkins of the Cabinet Office on the management of Parliament. The report proposed wide-ranging reforms of the management of the Parliament, including a parliamentary commission comprising members of both houses to manage the affairs of the Parliament. The government introduced a parliamentary management bill to the other place to give effect to that proposal. The bill was referred to a joint committee where Max was highly critical of the proposed structure and that the administration of the council would have been subordinated to that of the Assembly. The committee recommended the bill be withdrawn and proposed a non-legislative parliamentary management board structure, similar to what we have today. The proposal was interrupted by a general election and was never again revisited. As Max said in his oral history project on this account, in his time in the council, and I quote it, "The Moore-Wilkins report was nothing more than a blatant attempt by Roger Wilkins and Tim Moore to hobble the presiding officers and the independence of the parliament by controlling their resources. If the two presiding officers of the day, myself and Speaker Kevin Rizzoli, had not, much to the chagrin of our ministerial colleagues, rounded up the troops in Parliament and said, hey, this ain't on, it would have happened." Max was a staunch monarchist, and there was much more pomp and pageantry on the official openings of the Parliament by the Governor. On 20th of February 1992, Max was President when Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II opened the session of the 50th Parliament. Max, like the Black Rod, was resplendent in official dress of knee breeches, buckle shoes, tailcoats with lace cuffs and jabot. Afterwards, Her Majesty unveiled a portrait of herself in the Fountain Court, which we all admire, to commemorate the 40th year of Her Majesty's reign and the 50th Parliament in New South Wales since responsible government. Max was the instigator of the portrait in arranging sponsorship and its painting by the Royal Portrait artist Mara McGregor. With good humour, Max referred to one such challenge of that opening in his valedictory, recounting the difficulty he encountered in teaching the usher of the Black Rod at the time to march backwards. It's no secret that Max was never a fan of the media, and they of him. He came under much criticism in the media in 1997 following the ceremonial opening of Parliament with the usual parade of judges in robes, university chancellors and military guards of honour by the three armed services of Macquarie seat, and indeed a RAF flyover. He pulled a lot of strings as a brigadier. I recall one opening of Parliament including a huge television screen on Macquarie Street, bagpipe bands, police horses and a proposed ceremonial military gun salute from South Head. I don't think that last part eventuated. Max was also instrumental in forging the partnership with the Solomon Islands Parliament, which continues today as the Twinning Partnership, a great legacy. Max was awarded the Cross of the Solomon Islands in recognition of his contribution to that nation. Now, I was appointed Executive Officer, or today termed Chief of Staff, to President Willis in 1993. I succeeded Trent Zimmerman and was succeeded by Jason Collins. And as noted by Max, again in his valedictory, we were all young Liberal state presidents, coincidentally, often a pain in the side, but an investment by him in the young and future contributors to our state, and I thank him for that. There are too many stories to tell today from my time with President Willis. Just briefly, from the visit by Prince Charles to the Parliament, our presence, his and my presence in the official stand at the apparent assassination attempt on Prince Charles at Darling Harbour, and Max exclaiming to me, "Oh my God, not here," through to hosting the Governor of Guangdong, our sister state, both in Sydney and all the way to Canberra to visit Foreign Minister Gareth Evans, to the morning we partied hard after winning the bid for the Sydney Olympics. Great memories from a great boss, a great mentor and a friend to the end. I learned firsthand in that time that Max held very high regard for the staff of the Legislative Council. He served with those who he served with, particularly the clerks, such as John Evans, Linda Lovelock, David Blunt and Warren Cahill, just to name a few, and the important role in protecting the institutions of Parliament and of this place. He once said to me that politicians come and go from this place, but the dynasty of the clerks continues forever, maintaining the majesty of the institution that underpins our democratic government. He also said to me once jokingly that even if there was a nuclear holocaust, the clerks would emerge and reassemble the Parliament and continue the institution. Max was a much respected member of the Liberal Party who was a warrior in many party internal affairs. He was active in the highly contentious period of the 1980s and 90s when external influences were attempting to hijack the Menzies Liberal Party and drive it further to the right of the political spectrum. I alluded to this period when honouring Max's contemporary, the Honourable John Jobling. Max and his contemporaries, like Virginia Chadwick, John Hannaford, Ted Pickering and others, then and later fought the good fight to keep the New South Wales Liberal Party a right-of-centre party based on the ideals of Menzies liberalism. His work and their work laid the safeguards that reinforced the long-term stable party structures that delivered successive New South Wales governments from Greiner to a Farrell to today's Perrottet government, and indeed helped contribute to the stability of the long-lived Howard federal government. I pay tribute to him and them for their courage and service to the party. Max was an incredibly stylish man who enjoyed entertaining, and many will remember him for the dining in the President's suite with red-bordered bone china, crockery, crystal drinkware and silver table centrepieces, which I recalled he availed to all members of this place if ever requested. As President, he exploited the prestige of the President's dining room to host events for people from many walks of life, including the judiciary, law reformers, civil libertarians, social issues campaigners, academics, and importantly, many visiting heads of state and diplomats. And of course, he always included formal invitations to a variety of members in this place as guests at all those occasions. Regrettably, it was one of those last dinners he hosted to acknowledge the retirement of the Honourable Liz Kirby that led to his misfortune as President. On the 25th of June 1988, the House was debating the removal of Justice Bruce from the Supreme Court when the debate came to a vote late that evening. The President slurred his words in proposing the question before the House, and in the vote, Justice Bruce was not removed, but the media were present for the vote and clamoured over the incident next morning, with the result that Max resigned as President to the Governor to be succeeded by Virginia Chadwick. In his valedictory speech, Max quotes former UK Prime Minister Harold Macmillan saying, "You will not find in politics ever fairness or gratitude." I think that's a bit harsh. I'm afraid I'm going to have to disagree with my former boss. I'm proud to be standing here today expressing my gratitude to Max Willis on behalf of myself and many other Liberal members and members of this House. He helped inspire and helped along their journey, and the many people in New South Wales his public service has positively impacted. I return to the simple but powerful notice in the Sydney Morning Herald where I started. The Honourable Max Frederick Willis, RFD, ED, CSI, 6th of December 1935 to the 18th of August 2021. Lawyer, parliamentarian, citizen soldier. Valet President Willis.